Paimon is known as the King of Hell, but the story behind his name is far darker. They didn't just summon a demon. They summoned a legacy, of suffering, of sacrifice, of silence. And they made you watch. In Hereditary, the horror was palpable. The images were disturbing. The sounds disorienting. The story unforgettable. But beneath the surface, something older was whispering, something ancient that most viewers sensed but couldn't fully name. What they witnessed wasn't simply cinematic terror. It was the symbolic unfolding of one of history's most feared occult rituals, centered around a real entity, Paimon, the ninth king of hell. What Ari Aster alluded to wasn't crafted for entertainment. It was rooted in texts that have haunted the shadowed corridors of forbidden knowledge for centuries. Paimon isn't a fictional creation. His name appears in ancient grimoires, books whispered through hidden orders, passed from alchemists to magicians to scholars of the forbidden. His image may have been reborn in modern culture through cinema, but his legend predates film by hundreds of years. What if Hereditary wasn't just horror fiction? What if it was a ritual disguised as a narrative? And what if that ritual never truly ended? Long before horror films and online theories, long before his name was spoken by modern audiences, Paimon was already feared, not simply as a demon, but as a sovereign of forbidden knowledge, an entity with ancient dominion over what is unseen. His name emerges in Ars Goetia, the first book of the 17th century Lemegeton, one of Western occultism's most influential grimoires. Yet Paimon is not portrayed as chaotic or monstrous as pop culture imagines demons. He is regal. He is deliberate. He commands with terrifying composure. He rides upon a lone dromedary across the infernal plains, announced by blaring trumpets, cymbals crashing, and shrill cries, a royal procession not of chaos, but dominion. His arrival is never subtle. It is proclamation. He has come, and with him, knowledge, power, consequence. Paimon commands 200 legions of spirits, some fallen angels, others ancient celestial intelligences. He does not slip through cracks or haunt dreams. His presence dominates. For when Paimon is summoned, it is as though he steps onto a grand stage, and that stage is the mind of the summoner. What makes Paimon uniquely dangerous is not simply his rank, though he answers to none but Lucifer himself, but his domain. He is the patron of philosophy, of science, of secret arts. He speaks of astronomy, of the Earth's nature, of elemental forces, of the structure of thought. He reveals truths not meant for unprepared minds, truths that forever reshape those who dare to hear them. Some say he represents the ultimate intellectual temptation, the pursuit of knowledge so potent, it dissolves identity itself. For occultists, Paimon offers keys to mastery, over elements, over spirits, over hidden realities. But the price is steep. Not simply ritual sacrifice or rigid discipline, but a surrender, of morality, of clarity, of control. His form is ambiguous, masculine in presence, yet laced with feminine qualities. The ambiguity is not accidental but symbolic, bending perception, warping duality, blurring truth itself. He is not merely powerful. He is manipulative by nature. And those who summon him are warned. You must speak to him with reverence. You must allow him to question you. He is not a servant to command. He is a sovereign of negotiation. A challenger. A ruler of psychic exchange. Paimon's danger lies not only in the knowledge he offers but in how that knowledge is delivered. He does not grant simple answers. He tests intent. He offers keys to doors the mind was never meant to open, but demands the price be paid in something far more intimate than blood, the self. The rituals to summon him are precise, rigid in their requirements. The summoner must face the northwest. The space must be prepared with offerings. Some grimoires speak of sweet scents, others whisper of sacrifices not written openly. His sigil must be drawn with perfect accuracy. The circle must be unbroken. Every gesture, every word of the invocation is deliberate. Nothing is casual. When he arrives, it is not as a whisper but as an overwhelming presence. The grimoire warns that his voice is deafening, so loud, the summoner must ask him to lower it simply to comprehend his words. This is not theatrical flair. It is symbolic. The summoner does not control the dialogue. They are permitted to hear only what they are prepared to receive. And when Paimon speaks, he does not begin with answers. He begins with questions. He examines the summoner's desire. Why do you seek what should remain hidden? What will you do with the knowledge once obtained? Will you wield it to serve others? Or will you bend it to serve yourself? This interrogation is not for his benefit. It is a weighing of the soul. Those who falter in clarity, those who hesitate or lie, they are dismissed. For Paimon is not interested in curiosity. He is drawn to commitment. He seeks those willing to abandon safety for knowing, to trade certainty for chaos, to shed the comfort of ignorance for the burden of awareness. In return, he offers mastery over sciences unseen, over the arts of persuasion, over the manipulation of minds and elements. His gifts are profound, but they are never free. During the Renaissance, when occultism flourished behind locked doors and velvet curtains, Paimon was not invoked by madmen or desperate fools. He was summoned by scholars, nobles, strategists, men and women who sought not destruction but influence, who wished to reshape politics, to mold the tides of war, to whisper into the ears of kings. They did not burn the world. They rewrote it. For Paimon's power is not in fire or torment. His power is in design, cold, structured, precise. The true manipulation lies not in chaos, but in quiet recalibration of thought itself. Behind every ritual lies a darker secret, one rarely spoken aloud. Contact with Paimon does not always manifest as shadowy apparitions or swirling smoke. Sometimes, it begins with thoughts you cannot explain. Obsessions that take root. Dreams that bleed into waking life. Knowledge that arrives unbidden, too complete, too fast. He does not always knock at the door. Sometimes, he is already inside, waiting for you to notice that you are no longer alone within your own mind. The grimoire does not state this directly, but it lingers between the lines. Summoning Paimon is not merely an external invocation. It is an internal surrender, a fracture of the seal that divides curiosity from obsession. Once that fracture occurs, what enters is not just information. It is presence. It is transformation. For the real ritual is not the candles. It is not the incense or the chanting. The real ritual is the act of offering your mind as a throne. And once he sits upon it, you no longer choose when, or if, he ever leaves. For centuries, in chambers concealed behind heavy velvet curtains and guarded by silence, his name was whispered, not in terror, but in hunger. Not for wealth, nor for carnal pleasure, nor for wanton chaos, but for something infinitely more seductive: control. Control not just of people or events, but of reality itself. In the Renaissance, when the boundary between science and sorcery was thin as parchment, Paimon was summoned not as a beast of fire and fang, but as a tutor to kings, a counselor to alchemists. A weapon wielded by those whose ambition could not be contained within the rigid order of the world. Philosophers sought him when knowledge from books no longer satisfied. Military leaders whispered his name when strategies failed to tip the balance. Royal advisors invoked him when empires trembled and they required more than politics to shape destiny. Paimon was not a demon to whom they prayed. He was a living archive consulted by those who dared. And yet, the price was never hidden. The texts warned, again and again. What he gives, he does not take back. What you receive, you carry forever. Not merely the knowledge, but its weight. Paimon offers insight into the mysteries of existence, the movement of stars, the flow of energy through land and flesh, the subtle mechanics by which mind bends matter. He can teach the arts and sciences unbroken, not fragmented lessons, but complete systems that reveal the architecture beneath all things. He offers mastery not simply over the self, but over others, through rhetoric, through charisma, through mental influence. He can turn the unknown into clarity. He can elevate the powerless into forces of gravity. And many accepted this gift. There are journals, letters, and fragmented accounts, some buried deep in locked archives, some veiled beneath metaphor, hinting that certain figures who ascended swiftly through European courts owed their rise to knowledge not of mortal teachers, but of something summoned. But every ritual, every surviving grimoire, every account whispers the same truth. What you gain is never free. And once the exchange is made, it cannot be undone. Those who summoned Paimon often discovered that victory came entangled with shadows. Paranoia grew like vines around their thoughts. Obsession gnawed at the edges of their waking hours. Dreams grew vivid and intrusive. Isolation crept, not as exile from society, but as distance from who they once were. Paimon does not steal your soul. He expands it, unnaturally, rapidly, dangerously. The self fractures under the weight of illumination, like glass exposed to sunlight too intense, too sudden. You begin to see what others cannot. And you lose the ability to unsee it. The illusion of control becomes the prison. The price is not agony. It is transformation. And still, they called him. Because the most dangerous impulse within mankind is not violence. It is the need to know. The thirst to understand, to pierce the veil, to surpass the boundaries drawn by the divine. There are those who would burn everything for a single answer. And Paimon does not tempt those who seek amusement. He waits for those who are already on the precipice, pulling threads into the dark. He does not push you. He stands at the final threshold, offering what you already desire. And once you take it, the descent begins. Not downward. Inward. You do not fall into hell. You spiral into yourself, until you discover that some of what stirs inside was never entirely yours. This is why his rituals persist. Why his name, his sigils, and his protocols are still passed quietly through occult circles. It is not superstition that keeps them alive. It is results. Those who follow the rites report change. Whether hallucination or awakening, they do not walk away untouched. Some believe they are contacting an external entity. Others argue Paimon is not a being, but an archetype, a buried construct within the human psyche, only accessible through ritual excavation. But in truth, it does not matter which is correct. The effect is always the same. The summoner becomes something new. Not possessed, necessarily, but altered. Subtly, permanently. Enough to notice. Enough to wonder which part of their power is theirs. And which part now answers to a name they can never unlearn. The ancient magicians understood this distinction. They did not fear demons because they were evil. They feared them because they kept their promises. And once a promise is fulfilled, there is always a debt. Paimon embodies that exchange more than any other spirit of his rank. He offers knowledge, real, transformative, often dangerous. But the cost is never negotiable. He does not crave blood. He demands something far more valuable. Your certainty. Your limits. And once surrendered, you can never return to the world as you once knew it. When Hereditary premiered in 2018, it was presented as psychological horror, another exploration of grief, trauma, and family disintegration. But those who watched closely saw something else, something far more deliberate. too aligned with ancient demonology to be mere coincidence. Ari Aster didn't just write a horror film. He reconstructed a ritual. Step by step. Symbol by symbol. Scene by scene. Hereditary unfolds not merely as a descent into madness but as a cinematic ceremony, one that invokes, prepares, and ultimately enthrones Paimon. At its center stands Ellen Lee, the grandmother, whose death triggers the spiral. Though absent in body, she remains present through design. Her devotion was never to her family, but to a hidden covenant. She was the priestess. Her bloodline was the altar. Her descendants, the offering. From the opening frames, clues are embedded like sigils beneath the surface. Paimon's symbol appears repeatedly, in necklaces, in notebooks, carved above thresholds, silent markers guiding the ritual's unfolding. These are not artistic flourishes. They are instructions. Aster did not merely research demonology. He embedded it. The camera lingers on symmetrical frames like altars, on symbols like seals, on gestures that mirror invocation. The film moves with the calculated precision of a ceremony in progress. Each tragedy, each unraveling, another step in the ritual. Charlie, the granddaughter, is groomed from birth, shaped under Ellen's influence to be the initial vessel. Her peculiar behavior, her fixation on death, her awkward presence, she exists between innocence and possession. But she is only the beginning. Paimon desires a male host. One strong enough to bear the crown. Charlie's death, brutal and shocking, is no accident. It is a transfer. A fracture designed to rip open the family's soul, to hollow the vessel for what follows. Peter becomes next in line. But he is not chosen. He is cornered. The true horror of Peter's possession is not found in violent exorcisms or explosive confrontations. It lies in the quiet unraveling of identity. Not an invasion, but an erosion. Each tragedy strips away his defenses. The death of his sister shatters him. His mother's grief becomes a weapon, her blame slicing into what remains of his stability. His father, the final anchor of reason, is consumed by fire, both literal and symbolic. Peter isn't simply grieving. He is dissolving. And as he crumbles, the cult waits patiently. Because Paimon does not force his way into a vessel. He waits for the host to empty itself. This is where Hereditary shifts from horror into ritual revelation. Possession isn't a sudden event. It's a process. A dismantling of the self, piece by piece. What makes it terrifying is how recognizable it is. It mirrors how trauma works. Grief rewires the nervous system. Fear fractures perception. Shame erodes self-worth. Until eventually, you question whether you were ever anything solid to begin with. Ari Aster captures this truth with surgical precision. Identity doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures. Then it rots. Then it forgets. The possession is not merely supernatural. It is existential. The final offering is not Peter's body. It is his erased individuality. And Paimon does not storm in with violence. He is welcomed by absence. By vacancy. When Peter falls from the attic window, his soul departs. The golden shimmer that descends into his body isn't metaphorical. It's enthronement. When Peter stands, it is no longer Peter. And no one even noticed when it happened. This is the layer of Hereditary most viewers feel but cannot name. It's not a story of ghosts. It's a blueprint. A diagram of generational possession, ritualized, intentional, inevitable. You don't need horns or fire to orchestrate this kind of possession. You only need despair, repetition, and silence. Ellen's cult didn't improvise. They prepared. Every choice was a step in the ceremony. Every secret, every manipulation, every concealed truth served the ritual's conclusion. Peter was never meant to be Peter. He was shaped, bred, and hollowed to serve as a throne. The horror lies not only in the fact that the ritual succeeded, but that no one resisted it. By the end, the audience realizes the full scope of orchestration. The symbols weren't aesthetic choices. The deaths weren't random. The grief wasn't happenstance. Everything was design. A symphony of obedience to an ancient rite, this is the real possession. Not fire and brimstone. Not screaming exorcisms or levitating bodies. But ritualized programming. Slow. Deliberate. Complete. What Hereditary exposes is not an isolated act of horror. It's a mirror. A reflection of how identities are shaped, generation after generation. How obedience is passed down, not through force, but through quiet conditioning. You don't need a cult to lose yourself. You only need repetition. You only need silence when something breaks inside. You only need people around you to say, "That's just how it is." Inheritance becomes ritual. Obedience becomes survival. Trauma becomes tradition. And before long, you no longer recognize what parts of you were chosen, and what parts were assigned. This is why Paimon's ritual strikes so deeply. Because it exposes something far more widespread than demonic possession. It exposes systemic possession. Cultural. Familial. Spiritual. The monster is not the demon waiting in the shadows. The monster is the system that prepares the vessel. And yet, there's a chilling beauty in how the ritual operates. Paimon doesn't demand your surrender. He waits for you to offer it. He waits for the cracks. For the fractures to widen. For grief to hollow you. For fear to isolate you. For guilt to paralyze you. And once there's nothing left but emptiness, he steps in. Not as an invader, but as a replacement. This is how the ritual spreads. Not through flames and blood, but through inheritance. Through the quiet agreements we never realized we made. You take the role. You wear the name. You accept the burden handed down. You call it loyalty. You call it tradition. You call it family. But beneath it all, you're following a script written long before you were born. The ritual doesn't require your consent. It only requires your participation. Most people don't even know they've stepped into the circle until it's already closed. The brilliance of Hereditary is how it disguises this ancient ritual inside something we all recognize: grief. It isn't foreign. It isn't exotic. It's intimate. Grief is the universal language that opens the gates. The cult does not need to chant in public. The summoning happens behind closed doors. In the quiet moments where grief dissolves resistance. Grief makes you vulnerable. It isolates you from logic. It blinds you to patterns. And as Annie spirals deeper into her loss, she stumbles into what she believes is support. A friendly woman offering guidance. A shared experience of pain. A path toward healing. But in truth, she's stepping deeper into the design. Joan is not a friend. She is a handler. Every conversation with Joan is not comfort, it is calibration. Every shared ritual is not healing, it is progression. Annie believes she's taking control of her grief, but she's being nudged, step by step, deeper into compliance. She doesn't question why the seance works. She doesn't question the symbols. She doesn't question why her son is now haunted. Because the grief is louder than the questions. This is how the ritual works. It doesn't silence doubt. It drowns it. Until the victim is eager to participate. Until they plead for the ritual to continue. Annie never sees the full scope. She becomes both victim and instrument. Even her husband, Steve, functions as part of the ritual. His skepticism isolates Annie further. His disbelief pushes her deeper into the cult's grasp. He doesn't realize that his resistance feeds the process. Because when no one believes you, you turn to anyone who listens. And when you find that person, you give them your trust, your vulnerability, your submission. This is the most insidious layer of the summoning. It appears voluntary, but it is orchestrated. By the time Annie recognizes the trap, it's far too late. Her family was never simply cursed. They were cultivated. Each member had a role. Each loss was scheduled. Each breakdown was necessary. And when the final step arrives, when Annie's own body is offered, the ritual is complete. The king has his throne. The final scene of Hereditary is not a climax of violence, but a coronation. Peter, now hollowed, stands beneath the crowned effigy. The cult kneels. The air hums with reverence, not terror. The camera does not shake. There is no chaos. Only stillness. Only order. Because this is not the end. It's the beginning. The ceremony has concluded successfully. Paimon has been enthroned. The vessel is secured. The kingdom established. The cult's chants aren't frantic. They are ceremonial. Calm. Precise. They speak as those who have rehearsed these words for years, perhaps generations. Hail Paimon. Hail King. The audience watches, disturbed but unsure why. Because this isn't how horror films typically end. There's no rescue. No final scream. No escape. Instead, there's completion. Fulfillment. The horror isn't that a demon arrived. The horror is how perfectly the system functioned. Every element aligned. Every participant played their role. Every sacrifice was offered. There were no mistakes. Only inevitability. And that's what makes this ritual unsettling. It's not chaos that empowers Paimon. It's structure. Planning. Submission. The ritual isn't evil because it's violent. It's evil because it's flawless. This is why Hereditary feels more disturbing than supernatural. Because the real monster isn't Paimon. The real monster is the machinery that delivered him. The cult isn't portrayed as wild fanatics. They are organized, patient, disciplined, and most terrifying of all, they believe they've done something righteous. They believe they've freed their god. Paimon doesn't demand terror. He demands loyalty, devotion, precision. This is why his lore endures in occult circles. Because he doesn't simply represent possession. He represents systems of manipulation. Not just in rituals, but in families, in institutions, in cultures, where generations are molded to serve a purpose they never fully understand. And by the time the crown is placed, the participants no longer question how they arrived here. They only celebrate that the throne has been filled. The deeper terror of Paimon's story is not that it happened on screen. It's that it mirrors systems we recognize in life. The hereditary patterns of control are not confined to dark rituals. They echo in the quiet obedience passed through bloodlines. In the unspoken rules that dictate loyalty to destructive legacies. Not all rituals involve candles and circles. Some are built on silence, on tradition, on unquestioned roles. The child inherits not only genetics, but obligations, buried expectations, invisible contracts signed long before birth. And when these legacies are questioned, the system responds, not with explanation, but with pressure to conform. This is where Paimon's metaphor becomes hauntingly real. He doesn't always need to be summoned through ancient texts. He arrives through repetition. Through cycles. Cycles of trauma. Cycles of obedience. Cycles of inherited pain disguised as duty. In Hereditary, every character was trapped long before the first scene. Their fate sealed not by curses, but by systems too old to challenge. Ellen, the grandmother, wasn't simply a villain. She was a priestess to a system larger than herself. A vessel of continuation. One that demanded successors. And Annie, though she resisted at first, was consumed by the very grief the system designed to break her. Steve, the father, served as a stabilizer. But stability can't survive isolation. And Peter, the final vessel, was shaped not by choice, but by inevitability. By the end, every role was fulfilled, every position occupied, and Paimon's throne was secured. This is the genius behind the narrative. It shows how possession can be systemic. Not forced, but inherited. Not imposed, but cultivated. Until the victim no longer resists. Because they no longer recognize the boundaries of self. This is not just occult horror. It is existential horror. It asks us, how much of what we believe is ours was ever truly ours? How many of our choices were pre-written by systems we cannot see? How often do we mistake participation for consent? This is why Paimon endures, not simply as a demon in grimoires, but as a symbol of how systems engineer surrender. He waits not at the gates of hell, but within the frameworks we inherit. Inside the rules we mistake for safety. Within the rituals we perform without question. Paimon's summoning is rarely dramatic. It's subtle. Ordinary. Incremental. You don't need a circle of candles. You only need generations of compliance. The sigils might be absent. The names might change. But the structure remains. A throne built on absence of resistance. When Hereditary fades to black, we're left with more than just the image of a crowned vessel. We're left with a chilling reflection of how many systems, families, institutions, cultures, operate with identical precision. Inheritance. Expectation. Silence. The crown passes. The throne is always ready. And in this way, the horror of Hereditary becomes timeless. Because we recognize the patterns in our own lives. The unspoken agreements we've made. The roles we've accepted without knowing. The silent rituals we repeat. Paimon is not simply summoned by occultists. He is summoned by generations who trade autonomy for belonging. By those who surrender identity for the illusion of stability. And in this, Paimon does not need to conquer. He waits for you to offer yourself. Because the most powerful form of possession is not violent. It's voluntary. And that is where true horror lies. Paimon's myth persists for one reason. Because it reveals something unsettling about humanity itself. We are drawn to knowledge. Even when it destroys us. We crave mastery. Even when we cannot bear its weight. We seek control. Even as we surrender it. The ancient grimoires that speak of Paimon's summoning warn not only of the demon's power, but of the summoner's desire. Because the true danger is not Paimon. It is what we're willing to give in exchange for what we want. Power. Influence. Answers. And once offered, there is no return. Paimon doesn't tempt with terror. He tempts with truth. He offers knowledge few can resist, and fewer can survive. This is why so many summoners throughout history have been scholars, nobles, and visionaries, those who believed they could control the exchange. But knowledge reshapes the one who holds it. The mind expands unnaturally, like a vessel stretched too quickly. The soul fractures under the strain of forbidden understanding, and what enters through that fracture cannot be easily expelled. In many ways, Paimon is not simply a king of demons. He is the embodiment of unchecked ambition, the hunger to know what was meant to remain unknown, the courage to pull back the veil without understanding what waits behind it, the will to trade humanity for elevation. In the ancient texts, Paimon does not seize power. He is invited, summoned. He requires precise preparation, ritual purity, absolute focus. The summoner is not a victim. They are a participant, willing, prepared, complicit. This is what makes his possession so chilling, because it forces us to confront a deeper question. How often do we invite our own destruction, disguised as enlightenment? How often do we offer the throne of our minds, in pursuit of something we believe will set us free? The greatest horror of Paimon's story is not his arrival. It's the recognition that the door was always open. As we descend further into Paimon's mystery, we confront a deeper truth. Paimon is not merely a figure in demonology. He is an archetype, an ancient symbol for a universal force that transcends any single grimoire. Every culture has its Paimon, not always by name, but always by function. The gatekeeper of forbidden knowledge, the guardian of truths that fracture the mind, the entity who offers power in exchange for surrender. In some traditions, he mirrors the trickster god, the one who presents opportunity wrapped in peril. In others, he echoes the serpent of Eden, the bringer of knowledge that was never meant to be possessed. This is why Paimon is so dangerous. Not because he deceives, but because he speaks plainly. He offers exactly what we desire, and allows us to damn ourselves by our own ambition. The true pact is not written in blood, but in desire. Desire for control, desire for influence, desire to rise above human limitation. And these desires, once awakened, cannot easily be extinguished. This is why systems of power across history have mirrored Paimon's design. Rulers do not seize power by force alone. They engineer obedience through generations. They cultivate submission through inheritance. Like Ellen's cult in Hereditary, real-world systems prepare vessels, shaping minds before resistance is possible. They do not need to force allegiance. They simply ensure there are no alternatives. In this sense, Paimon becomes more than an individual spirit. He becomes a reflection of systemic possession, a symbol for how power replicates itself. Through loyalty, through silence, through ritualized obedience. And just as Paimon demands precision in his summoning, these systems demand precision in their continuity. Deviation is punished. Questioning is suppressed. Tradition is enforced. Until the cycle feels natural. Until submission feels like identity. Until the throne is always occupied. This is why Paimon's story endures. Because it speaks not only to the supernatural, but to the mechanisms that govern societies, families, and institutions. Possession without chains. Control without violence. Rulership through willing succession. The cult in Hereditary did not conquer a family. They engineered an inheritance. And in doing so, they mirrored the oldest ritual of all. The ritual of power, passing itself down, while disguising the throne as destiny. The deeper we examine Paimon's archetype, the more we recognize his presence, not just in ancient texts, but in the architecture of civilization itself. His system of possession is not limited to ritual chambers. It thrives in boardrooms, in dynasties, in political empires, in religious institutions. Anywhere power is transferred by bloodline or indoctrination, the echoes of Paimon's design resound. The successor does not choose the role. The role chooses the successor. The vessel is prepared from birth, trained, conditioned, shaped to fit the mold. The rituals may change. The robes may be replaced with suits, the chants with policy, the offerings with obedience. But the structure remains. This is why Paimon's mythology is so enduring. Because it exposes the universal hunger behind every throne. The desire for permanence. Every system fears collapse. So it creates heirs. It builds succession. It ensures loyalty not by force, but by inheritance. The most efficient form of control is the one that appears voluntary. And Paimon embodies this perfectly. He does not storm kingdoms. He waits for kingdoms to summon him. He does not invade bloodlines. He allows bloodlines to offer themselves. In Hereditary, the cult does not abduct victims. They nurture them. They mold them. They prepare the house for his arrival, before the vessel is even born. This is the ancient wisdom embedded in the film structure. The true horror is not that Paimon takes control. The true horror is that no one resists. Because when the system is this complete, resistance feels unnatural. It feels like betrayal. The cult members smile as the ritual completes. Not because they are wicked, but because they believe they are faithful. To them, this is salvation. And this mirrors countless ideologies throughout history. When devotion replaces discernment. When tradition replaces conscience. When systems replace individuality. The throne remains filled. The name on the crown may change. The symbol may evolve. But the mechanism remains identical. Paimon's summoning ritual is not an isolated superstition. It is a blueprint. One replicated endlessly in the corridors of power. And perhaps this is why his story lingers in the subconscious. Because we sense its truth. Not as fantasy, but as reflection. As we approach the final layer of Paimon's mythos, we must confront the question that lingers beneath all his stories. Was he ever truly summoned? Or did we always carry him within us? Paimon's tale serves as more than an account of demonic invocation. It reveals the fragile boundary between autonomy and submission, between inheritance and possession, between selfhood and system. In Hereditary, the possession is generational. Each member of the family serves as both victim and participant. But this pattern extends far beyond the film. It echoes the mechanisms by which many lives are shaped. We inherit belief systems without questioning their origins. We accept roles without considering who assigned them. We participate in rituals without recognizing their purpose. And in doing so, we slowly offer our minds as thrones. Not to external entities, but to ideologies, to traditions, to expectations carefully curated over time. Paimon becomes the symbol of this unseen transaction. He embodies how easily the human soul can be guided. Not by chains, but by scripts written long before birth. This is the secret the ancients understood. In every summoning, The true offering is never blood or sacrifice. It is always identity. The moment you surrender authorship of your life, you prepare the throne. And once the throne is offered, something will always sit upon it. This is why Paimon remains so potent in modern mythology. Because he reflects not just our fear of demons, but our fear of losing ourselves, without ever noticing. The cult in Hereditary is not a distant evil. It is a metaphor for every structure that engineers its successors, without their consent. The child who carries the family's sins. The heir who inherits responsibility without question. The citizen who conforms to the unspoken rules. These are not isolated tragedies. They are the machinery of systemic possession. And when viewed through this lens, Paimon is no longer simply the king of hell. He is the sovereign of surrender, the architect of inheritance, the patient force that waits for us to abdicate our thrones. And once the throne is empty, the coronation is inevitable. Now, as the final seal is placed upon the ritual, we are left not with terror, but with reflection. Paimon was never the invader. He was always the invitation. The mirror we dared to look into, and could no longer turn away from. Hereditary does not offer resolution, because the ritual is complete. The vessel is crowned. The cult rejoices. And the system moves forward, ready to repeat itself when the time comes again. This is the chilling brilliance of Paimon's myth. Not because it speaks of supernatural horrors that lurk beyond our world, but because it exposes the structures that rule quietly within it. The possession is not external. It is systemic. It is generational. It is chosen through generations of unconscious participation. The cult does not need to expand its reach through force. Its power lies in preparing the next vessel, long before the first candle is ever lit. And so we are left with the final, haunting truth. The throne is always waiting. And the line of succession rarely breaks. But this is not where the story ends. Because Paimon's rule is only one chapter within a much vaster kingdom. Beyond his dominion, other sovereigns await, each ruling over their own domains of temptation, manipulation, and hunger. And among them stands one whose name is whispered with equal fear: Asmodeus, the king of lust, the prince of corruption, the master of desire. In the next chapter, we will step beyond Paimon's court and descend into the realm of Asmodeus, where possession is not achieved through inheritance, but through the seduction of the flesh, the domination of will, and the mastery of temptation itself. Prepare yourself, because the ritual continues.